fan fiction. The second one would limit who can view the fan fiction. You're right. So aren't these rebellions against places like ChatGPT just hurting the fan fiction community? Are they just kind of shooting themselves in the foot?
I mean, to a certain degree, and a lot of them say they kind of feel like they are in the short term doing something that goes against the entire spirit of fan fiction, but they feel helpless. And so I think at this point they're just kind of throwing darts at the wall to see what sticks and what works. A lot of them have been in these communities for a long time, and so their thinking is like, well, I might only get to share my writing with a couple dozen people instead of a couple thousand, but at least the machines will get me.
So it doesn't really feel like either of the two groups here that we've been talking about here, the group with copyright protections and these amateurs who don't have copyright protections, neither of them seem to be much of a match for these AI platforms and stopping them from scraping their work. So that makes me think that if you're one of these writers, the better solution would be for the US government to step in with some simple regulation that says, ChatGPT, for example, you can't upload this work unless you pay for it. And I know the government is having these conversations, there have been lots of congressional hearings, so is that a possibility? The government says, no uploading unless you pay the writers and the creators.
Well, it's true that the US government is having talks with all these AI companies, but we have to remember that we're still waiting for the US government to take action and come up with some kind of regulation about social media that's been around for over a decade.
Mm-hmm.
The US government is very, very slow acting, and the vast majority of members of Congress are still wrapping their head around how this technology even works. And so whatever they do is years ahead, and it's going to be tempered by the fact that they don't want to hold back these companies too much.
Explain that.
The US government sees itself in an arms race at the moment against China when it comes to AI. Both China and the United States have a lot of scientists that are invested in this. They have a lot of interest in being the world leaders in artificial intelligence. And so they know that every bit of regulation they put in place potentially holds back those US companies, as opposed to China, where there's very little regulation on data, and where there's a ton of data online that the Chinese government can easily access and even give to Chinese AI companies if they want to speed ahead in what's considered the sort of AI arms race between the US and China.
So the US government might have an interest in actually siding with the AI platforms over the creators because it makes us more competitive against our rivals.
Yeah, I mean, they don't want to hamper US AI companies to the point where they fall behind China.
In which case, it feels like the only way for creative types and for publishing platforms like the Times to fight back is to fight back really on their own for the next however many years. And I'm curious, Shir, if in your reporting, you think the complaints, with Sarah Silverman's and these publishing platforms is actually going to make the general public sympathetic and lead to a larger scale pushback against these ChatGPT-like platforms, or if the reality is just that people like these things, they're excited about them, and that's going to override any of these warnings that we're talking about.
I mean, look, right now, the people that are angry are the people that can see that their work has been copied or scraped and regurgitated. It's people who are already seeing that the machines have ingested their work and can copy their voices in a really realistic way. And we don't know what's going to happen going forward. I mean, companies like Google and Facebook are still deciding on how they're going to train their AI. And what happens if Facebook's AI decides to train on your data and can find posts that you wrote 10 years ago when you were in college and sound just like you? Or if Google decides to read your email and your Google Docs and it can say, hey, this is what Michael sounds like when he's planning a vacation with his family. Is the creepiness factor then that much more that all of us feel like our souls are being replicated by machines?
Right, and does that mean that suddenly we are all the fan fiction writer? We are all Sarah Silverman. We are all suddenly seeing these platforms slowly sucking a version of us out and in and giving it to the world in a way that is very weird.
Right, does it become a Black Mirror episode? It's unclear, but it could be that these AI systems are so extremely useful and beneficial for our lives that none of us care. Because at one point, people were really mad about Facebook sucking up their data and serving them ads, and Google doing the same. And then we ultimately decided that they provided such a useful service that it was okay with us that they sucked up our data. And we're really just in the beginning of this technology, and so we don't know yet. You know, one of the fanfic writers I spoke to actually put it in a really lovely way, in that she was in the middle of writing this new piece of fiction, and it happened to be about AI robots versus humans. And she stopped midway through writing it because she didn't want to post it online and feed more into the machine. But she said that where she's stuck, and the thought she's really stuck on, is that in this piece of fiction she was writing, not every AI robot was bad. Some of them were helpful, some of them were nice, some of them were good, and some of them were evil. And it was really about how the corporations behind those robots used them that decided whether they were good or evil. And so she felt like she just had so many questions about the companies running these AI, and how they're using the data, and how they're going to license it, and what value is going to be. All these questions are swirling around in her head. And it's like, are the robots good or bad? We don't know yet, and so we don't feel comfortable with them.
And so did she end up posting any of the story online?
No, she has not posted it yet. I think she still has too many questions.
Well, Shira, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Hello. Are the machines down, I'm guessing? Oh, okay. I forget what everything's called. Could I just order up there then? Oh, I see. I'll do a sausage egg McMuffin meal with orange juice.
Medium large.
Medium.
Yeah.
That's it. Thanks.
957.
Hello.
Good morning.
Morning.
957.
Thank you. Thanks.
threatening global food prices and the food supply in dozens of countries that rely on the grain. The year-old agreement, known as the Black Sea Grain Initiative, was a successful attempt to limit the global repercussions of Russia's war on Ukraine. But Russia has repeatedly complained that the agreement favored Ukraine over its own people.
I deeply regret the decision by the Russian Federation to terminate the implementation of the Black Sea Initiative.
During a news conference, the head of the United Nations said that Russia's decision would cause unnecessary suffering across the world.
Today's decision by the Russian Federation will strike a blow to people in need everywhere.
And smoke from wildfires in Canada is returning to the U.S. this week. By Monday afternoon, it was affecting about 72 million Americans across 29 states, from the Dakotas to New York. Nearly 900 wildfires are burning across Canada. Of those, the Canadian government says that more than 500 of them are burning out of its control. Today's episode was produced by Claire Tennisketter, Rob Zivko, and Mooj Zadie. It was edited by Devin Taylor, with help from Lisa Chow. Contains original music by Alicia Baitu, and was engineered by Alyssa Moxley. Our theme music is by Jim Grunberg and Ben Lansford of Wonderly.
Today's episode is sponsored by the Boeing Company.
Good morning. Welcome to Axios Today. It's Tuesday, July 18th. I'm Nyla Boodoo. Today, making birth control pills more accessible in the U.S. Plus, an RSV vaccine for infants is approved. But first, the U.S. urges Israel to uphold democratic values. That's today's one big thing. Israeli President Isaac Herzog begins a visit to Washington today. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had notably not been invited, although Netanyahu says that changed in a call yesterday with President Biden. The U.S.-Israel relationship has been strained as Netanyahu presses forward with his controversial plan to overhaul Israel's Supreme Court, despite widespread opposition from Israeli citizens and the U.S. Axios' Barak Ravid is here with what we need to know. Barak, first, what's significant about the call that happened between Biden and Netanyahu yesterday?
What the White House was ready to say is that Biden and Netanyahu agreed to meet sometime before the end of the year. No White House official used the word invitation in any way. And Bibi saying that he was invited to the U.S. is interesting because usually when a leader is invited, he's invited to the White House, to the Oval Office, to Washington, invited to the U.S. I mean, I don't know, where is the meeting going to take place? Des Moines? Los Angeles? where exactly those kind of meetings between leaders are taking place? I think we are still a long way from Netanyahu coming to the White House, and one of the reasons is, I think, that the White House still wants to see where this judicial overhaul is going.
Right, and Barak, Netanyahu has resumed his plans for judicial overhaul legislation after suspending them earlier this year when mass protests overtook Israel. So now, a few months later, a bill that would weaken the Israeli Supreme Court's ability to review government decisions could become law as soon as next week. So what is Biden's message to Netanyahu now?
Basically, don't move forward next week with this unilateral legislation that would limit the Supreme Court. Do this only if you can get a consensus and a broad agreement with the opposition. And Netanyahu's answer was, I am moving forward with this vote, and later on, during some recess in Parliament, I will try to get a broad consensus on other parts of the judicial overhaul plan. But the bottom line is, Netanyahu is moving forward regardless of the fact that Biden asked him not to.
What are you watching for next then, as this judicial reform effort continues?
question will be how big the protest is going to go. You see more and more IDF reservists who announce that if the legislation passes, they will not report to duty. And this is a big thing because the Israeli military is based in many ways on its reserve service. If those people will stop showing up, then the IDF's operational preparedness will be significantly damaged.
Axios' Barak Ravid from Tel Aviv. Thanks, Barak.
Thanks, Nyla.
Today's decision by the Russian Federation will strike a blow to people in need everywhere.
That's UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres yesterday morning, after Russia suspended the Black Sea Grain Initiative. That's a set of agreements brokered by the UN and Turkey last year that lets Ukraine export grain and other items during Russia's invasion. The blockade of Black Sea ports had sent food prices soaring around the world, and the UN estimates the agreement helped reduce food prices by more than 23% since last March. But the Kremlin complained that the deal mostly benefited Ukraine, while Western sanctions on Russian exports continued. Axios' Lauren Whitney Gottbrath has been following this story and will link to her reporting in our show notes. After the break, making birth control available over the counter.
With over 200 programs and partnerships to help foster more women in STEM, Boeing is creating an environment where inspiration can thrive. See where inspiration can take you at boeing.com/Team Boeing.
Welcome back to Axios Today. I'm Nyla Boudou. Late last week, the FDA approved the first daily birth control pill to be sold without a prescription. It's expected to be available starting early next year, but just how easy it will be to get this new product, O-Pill, from HRA Pharma is still unclear. Axios healthcare reporter Oriana Gonzalez is here with what to watch for next. First, can you catch us up quick on the history here? What was behind this push?
Health experts, gynecologists, doctors, they say the U.S. has been behind for years.
together at a political level.
The White House says Biden's meeting with Israeli President Isaac Herzog will reaffirm America's commitment to Israel's security. He also plans to meet later this year with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Climate envoy John Kerry says the U.S. is very committed to stabilizing relations with China to combat rising global temperatures. NPR's Emily Fang says Kerry is in China to figure out whether the two competing countries can see eye to eye on climate change.
Kerry's meetings with the Chinese premier as well as China's top diplomats serve to encourage Beijing to stick to the government's climate goals and reduce the country's use of coal. Kerry's in Beijing as the city heads into nearly a full month of record heat, with temperatures being above 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Veteran diplomat and former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger was also in Beijing this week. Kissinger met with China's defense chief Li Shangfu, who the U.S. sanctioned years ago for buying Russian weapons. Li has so far refused to meet with U.S. Defense Chief Lloyd Austin because of those U.S. sanctions. Emily Fang, NPR News, Taipei.
Stocks finished higher on Wall Street. The Dow gained 366 points, up 1%. This is NPR.
Good afternoon. I'm Ann Thompson. This is 91.7 WTXU. The closure of Northern Kentucky's only juvenile detention facility last month is putting a strain on local law enforcement agencies, according to State Senator John Schickel. He says the Department of Juvenile Justice's decision to close the state's only all-girl facility in Newport due to staffing issues was a miscalculation. Schickel is asking Kentucky's executive leadership to reopen the detention center as soon as possible.
That I know of, it's not taken. The other ones are also not ready. Look, major metropolitan area across the river from a major city. We need this detention facility open.
Law enforcement agencies like Florence Police say officers are having to transport juveniles hours away because there's no other place to house them. Youth offenders who were previously at the Campbell Regional Juvenile Detention Center were moved to a center in Boyd County in June. The facility in northern Kentucky is expected to reopen in about 60 days. Ohio is competing to be part of a federal initiative to reduce greenhouse gases. The Ohio Newsroom's Kendall Crawford reports organizations and industries across the state have applied to bring a hydrogen hub to the region.
The Bipartisan Infrastructure Act designated around $8 billion in funding for hydrogen hubs. The hubs are meant to produce, store, and deliver hydrogen as a source of clean energy. Ohio has teamed up with Michigan for its application. University of Toledo's Vice President of Research, Frank Casanetti, says if we get it, it would be a big win for the region.
I think the fact that we'll be reducing the carbon footprint in our region is going to be very important, not just for the problem we have, but also it's important for the health as well.
Casanetti says their proposal is to produce hydrogen via electrolysis, a process that doesn't emit methane gas. He says there's already a project underway at a power plant in northwest Ohio to do just that. For the Ohio Newsroom, I'm Kendall Crawford.
If you have a ticket to tonight's Reds game against the Giants, you can also see the end of last night's game, which will resume at 5:40. Rain forced suspension of yesterday's series opener between San Francisco and Cincinnati, where the score was tied at 2 and 1 out in the top of the 8th inning. This after a 1 hour 55-minute delay. The Giants, who've won 5 straight and 6 of 7, have runners on second and third. Tonight's game, the second game, starts at 7:10.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Easy Cater, committed to helping companies from nonprofits to the Fortune 500 manage food for work with online order.
Earlier this year, a federal court ruled a similar law in Tennessee unconstitutional, saying it was vague and not uniformly enforced. Joe Ingles at the Ohio Public Radio Statehouse News Bureau.
Construction will begin this fall on Cincinnati Children's East Gate, a 110,000 square foot medical building that will include outpatient surgery, specialty clinics, and an urgent care. The building will be next to TQL headquarters, visible from I-275 near State Route 32. It's expected to open in 2025. An $800,000 grant will help the Cincinnati Fire Department with recruiting. At least some of the money will be used for sign-on bonuses for 100 new hires. The grant is from Ohio's portion of federal stimulus from the American Rescue Plan Act. The state has been funding first responder agencies for recruiting and wellness efforts. The latest round of awards also include $92,000 for the Loveland Sims Fire Department to hire a behavioral health consultant and a wellness coordinator. Here's the forecast. Partly cloudy with a chance of some storms tonight and a low of 67. Then tomorrow, partly cloudy, isolated showers and a high 83. It's 83 degrees now. I'm Ann Thompson. This is 91.7 WVXU.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Adrian Florido in Culver City, California.
And I'm Elsa Chang in Washington. One of the ongoing global impacts of Russia's war on Ukraine shows up in grain prices. Yesterday, Russia pulled out of supporting grain exports. Ukraine says it wants to keep shipping grain from its ports in the Black Sea, and it says it needs partners to keep those exports flowing to control global food prices. Today, in the port city of Odessa, one of Ukraine's most reliable partners, the U.S. offered to help. Joining us now is NPR's Joanna Kakissis, who was in Odessa today. Hey, Joanna.
Hello, Elsa.
Okay, so the U.S. is offering assistance here. What exactly happened today in Odessa?
So yeah, the head of the U.S. Agency for International Development, Samantha Power, she was at Odessa port today speaking with Ukrainian officials and grain dealers on how to keep agricultural products moving out of the country, moving out of Ukraine. She slammed Russian President Vladimir Putin for leaving the grain transport deal and for continued attacks on Ukraine, including these drone and missile strikes on Odessa's port very early today.
Vladimir Putin decided to cut off a vital lifeline to the rest of the world. And overnight, Russian forces fired drones and cruise missiles not far from where we are standing right now.
Samantha Power stood side by side with Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Kubrakov in the shadow of these enormous grain silos in this port that was once bustling with activity, but is now eerily silent. USAID has already pledged $100 million to help farmers and Ukraine's agribusiness industry. And today, Power announced an additional $250 million, some of which will help identify and create alternative routes for Ukrainian grain to leave the country.
We have a collective interest in ensuring that Ukrainian farmers stay in business. These measures are critical, but they will take time to pay full dividends.
So Power called on other governments as well as philanthropies to match the U.S.'s contribution to helping Ukrainian agriculture and agribusiness during the war.
Okay. Well, how else can Ukraine transport its grain? And what are the challenges to those various ways?
So that's a good question. While Russia was part of this Black Sea transport agreement, Ukraine was using its seaports, of course, but it was also transporting grain by river. One route is the Danube River. Power said exports along that route have gone up 10 times since the full-scale invasion. Another river, though, the Dnipro, is not much of an option anymore. A grain dealer in Odessa named Shota Kachishvili told me why. So he's saying that the explosion that destroyed the Kakhovka Dam in early June and caused all that catastrophic flooding in southern Ukraine has made much of the Dnipro River unnavigable in the south. And he added that building a new dam and managing the environmental damage is going to take many, many years. But there's another option for Ukrainian grain, and that's to transport it by train. And the Ukrainians did do that, but a lot of that grain got stuck in Central Europe, which messed with the local market and caused the local grain prices to drop dramatically. And the Prime Minister of Poland said today he does not want that to happen again.
Imagine. Okay, so what are the prospects for Ukraine continuing to use the Black Sea as an export route at this point?
Yes, President Volodymyr Zelensky is trying to be upbeat about it. He says he's been talking to the UN, to Turkey, to other countries about providing security guarantees. And the Deputy Prime Minister, Alexander Kubrakov, he told me that the government is also reaching out to companies around the world about using the river.
us it doesn't matter whether it's Ukrainian companies or foreign companies. It might feel in perception that probably Ukrainian companies, they can start first, but let's see.
He says he understands how challenging it's going to be to convince international companies to use Ukraine's ports in the Black Sea right now, but he adds that nothing can really replace this Black Sea shipping route, because the container ships that use it are enormous and carry the bulk of Ukrainian grain, which is the lifeblood of this country's economy and a global food staple.
Indeed. That is NPR Ukraine correspondent Joanna Nikissis. Thank you so much, Joanna.
You're welcome, Elsa.
Here in the U.S., one strand of the white nationalist movement has grown quickly over the last year. So-called active clubs are popping up all over the country. They emphasize mixed martial arts training to prepare for violence against their perceived enemies, and they're increasingly moving their activities offline and into public view. NPR's domestic extremism correspondent Odette Youssef reports.
Late last month, a judge in Romania ordered Robert Rundo to be sent back to the United States. Rundo is a self-professed white nationalist and fascist. He also regularly traffics in anti-Semitic tropes. He's facing charges in California for rioting and conspiring to riot at political rallies with members of his racist fight club, the Rise Above movement. For much of the last 5 years, he's been on the lam, but he hasn't been laying low.
What's going on, lad? Rundo here.
From shady locations in Europe, Rundo's posted media, like this podcast, for an American audience.
One of the things I get asked all the time, even though I've mentioned it on a couple of other people's podcasts, I've written a few articles on it, but it is how to start an active club.
An active club. When Rundo was running with his crew in 2017, it was perhaps the only one in the U.S., but today, the Anti-Defamation League believes there are active clubs in at least 30 states. They're decentralized and they vary in size, and increasingly they're networked and coordinating mobilizations. Crews in Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Tennessee, and the Pacific Northwest have been particularly public with their activities. But Michael Colborn of the investigative journalism website Bellingcat says the active club model isn't actually new at all.
At a very simple level, it's taking a model of kind of Eastern European far-right extremism, especially related to football hooliganism, especially kind of the aesthetics around some of the far-right scenes that you see in Central and Eastern Europe, and trying as best as possible to plant that onto an American context.
Rundo appears to maintain an arm's-length distance from the active clubs he's inspired. He makes money from selling active club fashion items online. But mostly, he gives advice on how clubs should brand themselves and use propaganda to project an image that's attractive to new recruits. That image is white, it's hyper-masculine, it's fit, and there's no place for swastikas. But Rundo is clear that that's really about maintaining palatable optics to an American public. Again, Michael Colborn.
He really realized the power that essentially being Nazi is without looking like Nazis. He realized the power that that can have to effectively mainstream far-right ideas and far-right extremists.
The current moment seems to be ripe for that mainstreaming, as the American right has united around the cause of diminishing LGBTQ rights. Extremist groups have found an opening. Stephen Pigott of the Western States Center has been tracking active clubs in Oregon, Washington, and Montana. Together, they've allied to form something called the Northwest Nationalist Network.
What's been troubling for me is to see their activities increase, especially during Pride Month, where you have these folks teaming up with other white nationalist groups and also crossing state lines to engage in the targeting of Pride events across the region.
Pigott says they're not just showing up and yelling Bible verses or waving flags.
They're screaming and trying to get in the faces of folks, and I think it's much more threatening, much more intimidating.
The coordination between active clubs and other white nationalist groups began about a year ago. Morgan Moon of the Anti-Defamation League says active clubs have hosted at least 2 so-called fight nights at venues in San Diego and in Washington State.
It's not only active clubs, Patriot Front came out, allegedly Hammerskins came out, etc. And it's kind of just meant to serve as this kind of fraternizing event where different white supremacists can come together in unity.
But since active clubs have ventured further out into public view, so have some tensions within the far-right extreme. Last month, a video of a sidewalk brawl went viral. It showed another violent extremist group, the Proud Boys, in their colors, using American flagpoles to beat members of an active club. It was near a pride event in Oregon City and apparently started because of a personal beef between the groups. The active club members were wearing dark-collared shirts, khakis, and masks until Proud Boys started unmasking them to expose their identities. Since then, there's a continuing online fight between Proud Boys and active clubs. But some extremism experts say there's no comfort to be taken from seeing these groups fight each other. The fact is, both are violent, and both had shown up in that location for the same reason: to advance the right-wing project of intimidating and harassing LGBTQ people out of the public sphere altogether. Despite Rundo's approved extradition to the U.S. and expected trial, many believe active clubs will continue growing and coordinating. In recent weeks, groups announced on Telegram the formation of 2 new regional active club networks, one in the South and one in the Midwest. Odette Youssef, NPR News. In the last year, appreciation for house music has seen a bit of a renaissance.
If that's a Beyonce reference, I got it. And it's true, the genre emerged in Chicago, and we're going to take a moment to remember one of the city's legends in house music, DJ Dion.
That is DJ Dion's 1996 hit, Freak Like Me.
DJ Dion was one of the architects, what we call the godfather of ghetto house.
And that, my friends, is DJ Scrap Dirty, a fellow Chicago native who talked to us about Dion's bass-heavy, sexually liberated sounds.
Ghetto house actually was like the child that nobody wanted to speak about because it was birthed in the underground, in the basement party.
It made waves around the world. DJ Dion was even name-checked in Daft Punk's 1997 track Teachers, which lists some of the French duo's influences.
News of DJ Dion's death was posted on his Facebook page yesterday. DJ Dion Boyd was 56 years old.
You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
Support comes from Ohio Living Land Fair, offering opportunities for those recently retired and looking for a flexible part-time work schedule. Land Fair is hiring servers for the independent living dining rooms. Discover more about compensation, benefits, and how to apply today at ohioliving.org/careers. That's ohioliving.org/careers.
Support comes from Precision Motor Cars, an independent Mercedes-Benz full-service and repair shop for all Mercedes-Benz from the 50s to this year's models. Precision Motor Cars' informed, qualified workforce strives to maintain their reputation for service and workmanship. Precision Motor Cars in Fairfax since 1972. 513-271-5565.
Support comes from St. Vincent de Paul. With your donation or purchase at one of its 8 thrift stores serving Cincinnati, you help families in need with basic necessities such as furniture, clothing, food, and prescription medicine. For store locations and a list of needed items, visit svdpcincinnati.org. St. Vincent de Paul, neighbors helping neighbors.
Support comes from Ball & Gainer. For more than 30 years offering personalized financial planning and an investment philosophy focused on growing clients' income. The goal in a world of uncertainties, delivering peace of mind. Learn more about Ball & Gainer online at dividendspaydividends.com.
Support comes from Wood, Herron & Evans. In a fast-changing and competitive world driven by creativity and innovation, the attorneys at Wood, Herron & Evans help clients protect and profit from their intellectual property by providing IP legal services built on over 150 years of experience and strong relationships. Learn more at whe-law.com.
Support comes from Graders, handcrafting indulgent ice cream in Cincinnati for generations, shipping coolers of ice cream from coast to coast. Graders Ice Cream.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from BritBox, with a variety of British mysteries available for streaming, including all seasons of Luther, Father Brown, and Silent Witness. Available during Mystery Month at BritBox.com/NPR.
From Indeed, designed to be an end-to-end hiring solution for businesses of any size to attract, interview, and hire candidates all from one place. More at Indeed.com/NPR. And from the listeners who support this NPR station.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Adrian Florido.
And I'm Elsa Chang. These are tense times in Guatemala in the run-up to the final vote in the presidential election. Days of protests followed a recent Justice Department decision to investigate one of Guatemala's political parties. Their reformist candidate surprised everyone by winning a place in next month's runoff. The U.S. has expressed deep concern about this latest turn of events, as well as others in the region who will be watching the next few weeks closely. Reporter Maria Martin has more from Guatemala.
Bernardo Arevalo, the candidate no one expected to win, continues his tour of heavily attended campaign stops. In largely indigenous Totonicapán, thousands showed up to hear Arevalo say it's time to end not only corruption, but centuries of racism and discrimination in Guatemala. Last month, Arevalo, the candidate from the small reformist party Semilla, won the second highest number of votes to qualify for an August runoff. He now faces former First Lady Sandra Torres, whose candidacy is supported by the establishment and who once spent time in prison for corruption. Arevalo's message of change is resonating with many Guatemalans fed up with a system of politicians who they think want to cling to power at all costs.
Nos están solo viendo la cara.
They are just messing with us, says 65-year-old Carlos Tejeda of Jocotenango, who lost his legs to diabetes and uses a wheelchair.
Porque eso es una burla.
It's a mockery that they tell us to go to the polls, and then this small group wants to manipulate everything so our vote doesn't count. Democracy is ending here.
Ya la democracia se está terminando.
Nevertheless, they have us looking forward to voting for Arevalo.